Good morning, everyone. Here we are again for another webinar. It's great that everyone's wishing everyone a good morning in the chat box. Continue to do that. Good to see so many familiar names in the chat box saying hello. So yeah, good morning to you. Thanks for joining us for our latest enablement webinar, which is dyslexia, definition, diagnosis, and next steps. My name is Andy Rigby. I'm one of the enablement leads here at Posturite, our division that helps many organisations with neurodiversity and disability assessments, workplace solutions throughout both the UK and globally. We do get regular queries on the back of our webinars around our enablement services, around access to work, around workplace adjustments. So if you do have any queries today or going forward, please do get in touch. Be good to hear from you. You can email enablement@posturite.co.uk or to myself personally, Andy Rigby at posturite.co.uk. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be available for replay on our website where all our previous webinars are hosted. If you haven't already, we encourage you to head across to posturite.co.uk/webinars. You'll hear great speakers and valuable content on topics ranging from DSE processes, menopause, ADHD, autism, and many, many more. During today's session, please feel free to submit questions using the Q&A box on your screen. I won't necessarily see questions that are put in the chat box, but do continue to use the chat box to chat amongst yourselves. But any questions, do put them in the Q&A. We have had quite a few questions already sent in to us, so thank you for those who have reached out in the previous few days. We will ask as many as we can. If we don't get to your question, we will contact you via email. We do have your details. So yeah, do get your questions in and do get involved. For accessibility, Zoom supports live captioning. This can be activated and deactivated within your account settings under the meeting tab. So click automated captions to enable or disable this. So to our webinar, we are joined today by our enablement account manager, David Mitchell, who will be discussing some of his own experiences around this subject. But firstly, Catherine Salisbury and Patrick Mulcahy, who regularly undertake diagnostic assessments, mostly around dyslexia. Everyone has heard of dyslexia, of course, but is the perception still outdated around what dyslexia is? We're getting a very good understanding over the last few years of neurodiversity, but do we sort of really understand what those sort of next steps are? So what is dyslexia? How can I tell if it's something that I may have? And if I do, what are the next steps going forward? So to discuss this in much more detail, I'll hand over to Catherine and Patrick.
Good morning, everyone. I think we've got a really good turnout today, which is amazing. Myself and Patrick are going to cover how can I tell if I have dyslexia and some other items between each other. I'm going to start off, then I'm going to hand over to Patrick. So as you can see from the first slide, first of all, how can I tell if I have dyslexia? I think a really important thing to say is that because when you have dyslexia, it's just in your profile, you'll have had these symptoms all your life. Quite often you won't think they're unusual. For you, they're the norm. You're used to working really hard to manage. You might find some tasks easy, others difficult. You might find it hard to organize your thoughts, have various problems that you might have noticed more than when you're at school and now be able to manage them. But that's just the way that you are. Why would you think there's anything different about the way that you are compared to other people? These tasks that you find difficult can cause you problems, but you just get on with things, get on with the job and just manage everything. Can we have the next slide, please, Andy? Excellent. Okay, nice to have Andy doing that. Self-esteem can be really affected by dyslexia and other specific learning difficulties that we'll talk about in a minute. So all the things that we've just talked about, finding tasks difficult, things taking you just a bit longer than other people, maybe being a bit late to learn to read and write when you were younger, maybe having a bit of speech therapy when you were younger, finding it difficult to finish in examinations, those things will all affect your self-esteem. Looking around the classroom or the workplace, or just general tasks that you have to do, like reading television schedules or just researching on the internet. If you notice other people find those things more easy than you do, it's going to make you feel bad. You're going to feel maybe you're a bit stupid, maybe you can't do things the way that other people can. It's just human nature to think that things that you find difficult are your fault. You're doing something wrong, or you just can't do things. That means that most probably in the workplace, specifically, you're going to try and compensate so that everybody else thinks you can manage fine. Develop strategies. So you'll cover up those feelings of doubt, some negative negative emotions. You're probably going to maybe take work home. I've met people who manage big organizations who maybe taking a lot of work home, managing schedules at home. They turn in the next day, everything's done, nobody knows there's anything wrong, or that you've spent all that extra time managing things that everybody else will be able to manage in the office. And that makes you feel terrible about yourself. If you find out that you have a specific learning difficulty such as dyslexia, it can boost your self-confidence. You suddenly realize that, well, that's why I've been finding things difficult. Increases your confidence. You can have some study skills support, some coaching in the workplace, and that will really boost your self-confidence. Can I have the next slide, please, Andy? Thank you. So if you decide to come forward for a diagnostic assessment, then, and I should take a minute to say that I think it's quite brave to come forward for a diagnostic assessment. That involves realizing that maybe having doubts that you don't have dyslexia, that you just can't do things, all leading back to the self-esteem that we were just talking about. But the diagnostic assessment process is something that people enjoy. 9 times out of 10 or 9.5 times out of 10, people say to me afterwards, you know, I really enjoyed that. It really helped me to understand myself. I found some things difficult when I thought I'd really find them very easy, and now I really understand my profile better. And that's why a large part of the assessment is to do with listening to you. So we would go right back to what happened when you were little, when you started school, how you found examinations, whether you carried on with school or maybe kind of were pragmatic and decided maybe you do something more practical before coming back to education later on, whether you went straight into the workplace. All these things are strategies. So we'll find out all the things that you're good at, all the things that you find tricky, analyze all of those, and then we move on to some assessment, which of course, although people do dread being assessed, is a necessary part of the assessment because we need to look at your personal profile. So it might seem unnecessary to look at things like reading, writing, and spelling for adults, but we're not really looking at how well you can read. We're looking at the time it takes you to manage things like reading tasks. So in the workplace, you can probably read anything, but it might take you a really long time to get through that paper or that document you've been sent by your boss, or even if you're the boss, something you're sending out to other people. You might have to get people to check over even your texts, your emails. You might find all of that kind of thing takes you a really long time. And that's what we're looking at, the time that things take you, not whether you can read, write, or spell, because we know you'll probably be able to do that really well. We have a new definition of dyslexia that is coming next year, organised by our practicing body. And in that definition, it mentions that dyslexia frequently co-occurs with other specific learning difficulties, such as ADHD, dyspraxia, also called developmental coordination disorder in other countries, which is a motor coordination weakness and might affect your ball skills. You might never have been netball or rugby captain. You might find a ball hits you on the head if somebody throws it at you. ADHD, which is attentional problems. You can be very distracted, procrastinate on things, and these are other things that might occur with dyslexia. But today we're talking about dyslexia. So you've had your assessment, you found out that you have dyslexia, maybe another specific learning difficulty as well. we're going to talk to you and discuss your diagnosis. You won't just be sent off and told that you have dyslexia. We'll be finding out from you how you feel about that. If you've had some validation, maybe you might realize that other people in your family, you might have inherited the dyslexia. You might want to talk about that. You'll want to talk about the kind of strategies that you can use, and in the workplace setting, how that would impact you, the kind of strategies that you can be supported with. And maybe, you might decide you want to go back into education and study for your PhD. Now, you know what the problem was when you were at school. You should get some more confidence to be able to move on to do whatever you want to. Go for that promotion. Use your coaching to just boost your strategies and manage everything much more well. So I think I'm going to hand over to Patrick now. He's going to start off by explaining the relevance of working memory in the diagnostic assessment process.
Thanks, Kathy. I wanted to just take a step back here, because when we're talking about dyslexia or specific learning difficulties, I think it gets forgotten that reading and writing is a relatively new thing. It's not normal, in other words, if there is such a thing, and there isn't, to be able to read and write for human beings. This is a completely taught process, but we judge each other to a huge extent on our ability to be able to read and write. This goes on at the time. That's effectively what our education system is. You're being taught a medium, which is writing, and then you're being marked or graded on your ability to manipulate this system. So if we go, I wanted to just take a step back from that and have a look at exactly what writing is. So that explains then why we're looking at certain aspects of auditory working memory when we're doing a diagnostic assessment. So it's not just a matter of bringing somebody in, getting them to do some literacy tests, and then saying, right, you've got a problem with spelling, you're dyslexic. That's not what's really going on here. That would be a part of the diagnostic assessment, like Kathy mentioned. We have to do that because the main kind of focus for us is the speed at which you're able to do these things. That's the key to all of this, really, is the speed at which you're able to manipulate sounds in your head. So if we take a step back, there are other aspects of your profile that we're looking at. And you can think of these as kind of perceptual. They're called cognitive, but really it's perceptual. So things like your working memory used to be called auditory sequential working memory, then it was auditory working memory, and I think now it's working memory. So eventually it'll just be M. It seems to get shorter every couple of years. But that's effectively what we're looking at. And there is a reason for that. So we're looking at auditory working memory. We're doing some subtests to check this, as well as phonological processing. Now, they both relate to sound, but I'm going to talk really about the auditory working memory side of it today, because we're using it all the time. Any task that involves literacy, you're going to be using auditory working memory. And auditory working memory is where you store sounds. So if somebody was giving you a list of instructions or directions to go somewhere, so they were saying first left, second right, over the roundabout, left again, into Gooch Street, etc., etc. It's how many of those can you keep in your head at any one time, get back to the car and follow the directions. The more of them you're losing, the more you're having an issue with auditory working memory. And it can be affected by a lot of things. Obviously, if you're stressed, your auditory working memory starts shrinking. So anxiety and dyslexia, there's a huge commonality between the two things. The more anxious you are, the more dyslexic you become, in effect, because of the way it affects your auditory working memory. So that's why stress for students in particular they will literally go blank in some circumstances. Now, we all have that problem. We all have issues with auditory working memory. Nobody's like those memory men who can remember huge amounts of names and details. There are tricks to doing that. So I wanted to take a step back and look at what we were doing before we had reading and writing, the way we memorized huge amounts of information. Generally, was music. If you give something a beat, it's easier to remember it. So if you think of the alphabet and you want to remember the layout of the letters, you just sing the song. So that's a song that's enabling you to remember 26 symbols, which is pretty amazing, really, when you think about it. I mean, I don't know what my visa number is. I have problems with my PIN number. That's only 4. So if you put something to a beat, and that makes it a lot easier to remember. So when people were reciting the Iliad and the Odyssey, it was musical. That's how they remembered this. So there's lots of repetition. Give it a beat. That's how you can remember huge amounts of information. The other way would be ritual. So if you have a ritual, you do something a certain way and you reproduce that every time, then the result will be the same. That's what a ritual is. A ritual is a way of memorizing a series of tasks without having anything written down. Writing only came in about 6,000 years ago, and most of it came from Mesopotamia, originally China as well. But really it was Mesopotamia was the first. The Egyptians like to think it was them, but really it was Mesopotamia, which would be modern day Iraq. And the writing system they used it's called logosyllabic writing. And it means that every symbol represents a word or a syllable. So it would have started with very simplistic pictograms, like a stick drawing of a man, a stick drawing of a woman. And then over time, this became more abstract. And it became these little marks on the clay. And that's how they, now we can actually decode them, thanks to an Irish person, needless to say, sometime around the 19th century, who cracked the code on this. It was helped by the fact that he had 2 pieces of text lying side by side. That made it a bit easier for him. But they were able to crack this. So now we can read these tiles from Mesopotamian times. But the difference there with their writing system, and it's the same with hieroglyphics, the Egyptian one is that an Egyptian scribe would have to learn 50,000 symbols to be able to read and write. So it was largely using visual memory. It would be like a taxi driver doing the knowledge, where that part of their brain is developed. And they have to work at this. I mean, to learn 50,000 symbols, that's pretty much all your life. Consequently, only 1%, less than 1% of the population was able to read and write. The scribe class, effectively, because all those signs they had on the side of the buildings, they were for the gods, they weren't for the people. They didn't care about the people. It was the gods they were communicating with. So reading and writing, that would have been largely a visual processing system. And the other thing that's odd about that is that they learned to read first, and then you learn to write. So they were completely separate acts. We kind of think of them as the same thing now, but they're actually 2 different things. The writing system we're using, that thing on the keyboard in front of you, the alphabet, that's based on lip movement. It's a sound-based writing system. So it's the movement of lips. It's developed by the Phoenicians about 3,000 years ago. And the Greeks stuck in the vowels. But effectively, it's the same thing. It's the sound of the word, not the word. So it's more like musical notation. We have all the music in the world, but you've got 7 notes. And with those 7 notes, you can write any piece of music. Similarly with the alphabet, we've got 26 notes on that keyboard, and you can write in any language you want to write in. So it's a sound processing writing system. So if we were using hieroglyphics and you had an issue with visual processing, you would have been dyslexic in Egyptian times. But if you're using the alphabet and you have an issue with auditory working memory, you're in the dyslexic category in modern times. So it's important to realize there's a cultural component to this, because of course it's not normal to be able to read and write. It's a miracle that any of us can do this. It's an extraordinary feat. You're making noises with your eyes. You're looking at symbols on the page and you're immediately turning them into a sound and then an image. That's decoding. And when you're writing, you're going the other way around. You have an image, it becomes a sound, and then that becomes a symbol. So you're using a coding system all the time. And you're either decoding, turning it into sound, or encoding, which is going back the other way, turning it into a symbol. So it's important to understand that reading and writing, it's a sound-based activity. So if you've got any issue with listening comprehension, it's more than likely that you're going to have a problem with reading comprehension, which is why a lot of dyslexic children are told to get their ears tested quite a lot when they're at school, because people think, oh, maybe he's a bit deaf, or maybe she's got a hearing impairment. They don't seem to be hearing what I'm saying or absorbing the information I'm taking in. Because, of course, it's not hearing in the literal sense. It's hearing in the processing of the sound sense. This is why it's so difficult to explain dyslexia to people sometimes, because it's assumed that reading and writing is normal, and that they either have a problem with their ears, they can't hear it properly, or they have a problem with their eyes, they can't see it properly, when that's not the case at all. So the most important takeaway from this section really is that reading comprehension and listening comprehension are very similar tasks as far as your brain is concerned. So if you have a problem taking notes in a meeting, or God forbid, you're asked to take the minutes and you're trying to struggle to write and listen at the same time, that's not just your listening, it's your listening comprehension is causing the problem. And similarly, that will affect your reading. Because when you're reading, you're listening to yourself. When you're taking minutes in the meeting, you're theoretically listening to somebody else. Similarly, with students, they'll have problems taking notes in lectures because they can't keep up. And then they'll have a similar problem in the library, because, of course, in the library, they're listening to themselves. So it's the same issue that's causing the problems for them. Consequently, they have to work for longer periods of time. Can you move on to the next slide for me, Andy? Right, so after the diagnostic assessment, I think that's why diagnostic assessments are so important, because we will detail exactly where the problems are. Is this mainly an issue with auditory working memory, like listening comprehension? Is this mainly a problem with the phonological processing, or just your processing speed? So in other words, you might have like a Rolls-Royce engine up there, but everything has to go into second gear when you're doing reading and writing. And that's what people don't understand about dyslexia generally. It's assumed that this is a literacy problem. It's not a literacy problem. They understand what they're reading, and they can read and write. It's the fact that their brain is having to work harder to do this. So when they do brain scans of people with dyslexia who've been reading for up to 10 minutes, their whole brain lights up. But when you look at the brain scan of somebody without dyslexia, there's only 3 or 4 areas of the brain. So they're both doing exactly the same task, but the person with dyslexia is doing something slightly different. It's kind of like Carlsberg, it reaches the parts other beers don't reach. So the kind of things that would happen after a diagnostic assessment then is, like if you were a student, we'd be recommending extra time, because time is the key. That's the thing that keeps cropping out. It's not just a formality that, oh, people with dyslexia get extra time. There is a reason for that. They need extra time. I know what people have, everybody gets stressed and anxious in an exam situation, but somebody with dyslexia really, really gets stressed and anxious. And I can have a far more detrimental effect on their performance. So what you're seeing when you look at their exam script is their dyslexia rather than their knowledge. So in a workplace, we'd be recommending access to reasonable adjustments. So that could be a variety of things, like being allowed to take breaks regularly. Perhaps technology where you could use specialist software, or just for generally people to be more understanding. For instance, if somebody has to have regular meetings with somebody, could there be a follow-up email reminding them that what we agreed on was point A, B, and C, so that there's a written record of what happened? And that will help somebody with dyslexia immeasurably, because if they have to rely on their own listening comprehension, 2 or 3 of the points will start disappearing by the time they've got back to their desk. And then they get stressed and they have to contact you again, and that makes them feel silly. And again, that feeds into the whole self-esteem issue. So you'll hear people calling themselves, oh, I'm just like really blonde or ditzy, et cetera, all this kind of words. Because humor covers up the fact that you're having these issues. But really, it's your self-esteem's taking a bashing. And I think that's why the relief and validation is the key. Once you've explained to somebody what's going on here, and that there is a reason for it, and that their IQ is fine, I think that's an enormous sense of relief to people. I've gone over time as per usual. It's genetic. So I'm going to hand back to Andy for the next part.
Hi everyone, so this is my section. So I'm going to cover my personal view of being dyslexic in workplace. I'd like to kind of speak about my personal experiences, what it was like having a diagnostic, and then basically support I've actually I use in workplace on a daily basis. Just to give you a personal kind of view. I know many of you are already talking in chat about having dyslexia or thinking you may have dyslexia. So we're hoping this could be relevant. Next slide, please. So yeah, was it a positive experience for me? So just a little bit of history about me, guys. If you haven't already heard from me in other presentations, but basically, I've worked in the industry of supporting people in workplace and education for the last 20 odd years. But I was actually diagnosed at the age of 41, so quite late in life when you think about it. And the reason for that, even though I was actually working in the industry of supporting people with challenges, with neurodiverse conditions, etc., the penny didn't drop for me. It was kind of an inkling that I may have a condition. I did have challenges. I was automatically doing the coping strategies. So yeah, so basically, yeah, kind of my history, I've struggled as I went through school. I struggled through work and worked the extra hours, as they've mentioned earlier on, to kind of make up for the challenges I was having in work. Not realizing that I was doing it, I was just kind of struggling and thought it was something I should do, and continue that extra work. Then I can get my work in on time or get it in corrected. So yeah, I had my own challenges, but I didn't kind of realize I was dyslexic till I did a little bit of an online check. You can go online and there's many little different checks. They don't define that you're dyslexic, but they do give you an inkling that you may be. I was luckily offered a diagnostic by Catherine, who's been presented this morning, and that was at the age of 41. So like I say, quite late in life. And the reason for that was, one, I kind of suspected, but it wasn't for sure that I was. I was very, very worried about it. I'll be honest, quite concerned about what the results would be. Am I actually dyslexic? Am I just stupid, as we've said? Yeah, it was quite a daunting thing. However, after, it was a very positive experience. I must admit, the test in itself, it can be anything up to 3 hours, I believe. And yeah, it's very exhausting going through all the different tests, because they're testing your ability, your strengths and your challenges. And it's a mental test as you go through it. You know, how many pieces of information you can remember, what's your reading speed, what's your reading ability, loads and loads of different tests. And it does mentally drain you. So it is a bit of an experience, but at the end, hearing the results, it kind of, for me, even driving home after the assessment, it was kind of, for me, an eye-opener, because everything in my previous life all fell into place. I began to think about when I was at school. I did my 11 plus, failed miserably, didn't actually finish in the test, as was mentioned, not enough time. So I was put in the lower classes. Every year I would, do really, really well, because I was a very practical worker. and I would be put up in class, and then I'd get to the exams and fall and fail again. And it was literally a zigzag all the way through education. With workplace, I was guided by my careers advisor at school to go into basically workplace. So I'd be doing apprenticeships and things like that rather than education. And luckily for me, things fell into place and I did quite well through engineering into computers, which kind of led me to the role that I'm in today. However, you know, it can be quite a challenge of knowing which path to go down when you're struggling with education. And then basically other things, you know, I failed to get into the police because of a spelling mistake. So lots and lots of things over my history kind of fell into place. And yeah, for me, it's been a very positive experience. One, because I know what my history is now and why that happened. But two, because, and this has been mentioned in one of our LinkedIn comments, I have skills as well as challenges. And recognizing those skills and utilizing them in workplace is really, really beneficial. And I find that exciting that I can do that and make a positive effect on other people. Next slide, please. So basically, the idea is, should you get a diagnostic, you know, what are the benefits for the employee or the employer? Obviously, from the stories we're hearing today, there are massive benefits for the employee because one is you can work out where you've got challenges and get support put in place, which we'll talk a little bit about on the next slides. But for the employer, it's a double whammy really, because one is they can support you, but they can also learn about the condition and learn about other people who might have that condition as well, and help support them as well. So it becomes a good learning experience for everybody. And there is a lot of support out there, whether it's just standard adjustments like we talked about, adjustments to extra breaks, you know, maybe starting a bit earlier if you're fresher in the morning, through to actual assistive technology, things like that, coping strategies and stuff. So all of these things can really, really benefit the individual and then benefit the employer as well. Next slide, please. So you've got a diagnostic, you basically know that you've got dyslexia. What happens next? What's the next moves? So basically, what we recommend is the workplace adjustments, or the workplace needs assessment, as it's always known. And that's where you ask your employer to put adjustments in place to help you with all these further support mechanisms that can help you. And yeah, basically you either go and reach out to your line manager, depending on the company. Many of our clients do it different ways. Sometimes it's the occupational health that might refer you through. It might be your HR. It might even be your health and safety department. But do reach out and say that, you know, you've got this diagnosis, or you may believe you've got a condition, even if you've not got the diagnosis, and just ask for that help. It's not about disclosing, it's about reaching out and saying, I believe I need some support. Can I have that put in place, please? Next slide, please. And then basically, I've mentioned how you can get workplace needs assessments through your company. Like I said, many companies do it different ways. First steps is to speak to your line manager, and then, you know, you'll go through your company's process to get that. Companies such as Posturite can deliver these, and there's also the Access to Work scheme. So there's many different ways that we can get support in place. It is basically the law that the company has to put reasonable adjustments in place for you. And reasonable adjustments means that they're reasonable for both parties. One is to support you in your working role, and also that it's reasonable that the company can do that to help you do your job. Next slide, please. And then basically further adjustments, what is available? So we've mentioned about assistive technology, what kind of technology there is out there. There are many free features within Office and Microsoft Windows, but also there are further pieces of software that will help each different traits of challenges that you have, from speech to text. So you can speak the text and it will type up for you. That helps with actually getting the spelling right. Some can actually help with putting grammar in there. And then the opposite, text to speech, where it's speaking the text to you, so you're hearing it audibly as well as seeing it visually. And that's two ways of getting that information into your brain. And it really helps you understand what you're reading. And they can do things like screen tinting to help with reading, and even creating certain text into documents or audio files. there's many different assistive technologies, mind mapping solutions for more visual workers. I'm a very visual worker. I create my presentations using mind mapping because I'd rather have a visual screen with lots of images on there, which helps my brain function better. So having these different technologies can really help you perform better and sometimes, you know, more successful than you would have been. And then basically training and coaching. These are really important. Training side on the assistive technology, you need to know how to use the tools that you're going to use, how to use them to do your job role. But also coaching, where you have a one-to-one coach. It might be that you don't use technology, you might not use computers, and you might be, say, on a shop floor or a factory floor, or, you know, those kind of job roles. And you need more time management skills. You need more help with understanding your condition, prepping for meetings, post meetings, such as what Patrick mentioned. So all of these things become as different strategies that you can get put in place, embedded, and they'll support you with your job role. And we also recommend your line manager getting involved in some of those, where they can watch the last few sessions and help you with those strategies moving forward, because it can often mean a change to your working role as well. And then lastly, awareness. You're obviously getting a little bit of awareness today, but it's quite key that your colleagues understand your challenges and how to support you with that, that you may take a little bit longer in responding to things, you know, answering emails, reading documents, those kind of things, but also how to support you, giving you information before you go into a meeting. So having the agenda, what's the plan of the meeting, reduces anxiety. You know, when you're going through the meeting, and ensuring that you're getting the information delivered to you and you're understanding it, but then post the meeting, what are the minutes of the meeting, what are the parts of that meeting that are relevant to you, what are the tasks you've got to deal with. So all of these things can really help by your colleagues understanding the way you work and the way you work differently to others. Next slide, please. And then lastly, guys, where do we go from here? So we've gone through quite a few different of the neurodiverse conditions as we've done these webinars, guys. And what we're planning to do in October is talk more about the assistive technology, which we've touched on quite a bit as we've gone through them. And we want to talk about how they're recommended, why they're recommended, what traits and challenges they can support, and what's available out there, but also what's the future? What does the future hold with AI coming on board? We're seeing a lot of co-pilot recommendations, so ChatGPT and things like that. So how are they actually supporting individuals? So we're going to talk about all of those in our October webinar, guys. So I believe we're now going to hand over to a bit of a Q&A for you all.
Yeah, thanks everyone. I think appreciate everyone getting involved as well with the chat. There's a lot of things that resonate with a lot of individuals. So thanks for sharing a lot of experiences. It's really interesting when we do have these conversations and we have a lot of personal stories, how much it does resonate with people, and people sort of think, well, actually, you know, this happened to me. This is effectively my story as well. And hopefully there's a little bit of community that starts to come in. I think what's really interesting as well, Dave, you mentioned about the police and the onboarding within the police and essentially not getting into the police due to spelling errors. And you think of, in years gone by, the amount of sliding doors moments here that individuals have had, and the potential to create opportunities that haven't been there in the past, that hopefully we can correct going forward and make it, you know, make adjustments for people. That such a simple adjustments as Patrick mentioned about having a little bit more time, you know, which seems such a common sense approach, but in years gone by, that potentially that understanding wasn't there. So it's great that we can have all these conversations now. There's obviously quite a lot of questions that have come in, and we had some, as I mentioned at the start, before the webinar, but one that I do want to start with. We've had quite a common theme about maybe an organization's responsibility, and one of the questions was quite simply, do you think organizations should pay for testing? I'll open that up to the panelists.
Yeah, I think so. Obviously, I would say that, but I think, yeah, it's important because it falls outside the remit of medical. So in other words, if you go to your GP and say, I think I might have dyslexia, odds are that the GP is the person with dyslexia, by the way, because when I worked in universities, it was the Department of Medicine's got the highest rate of people with dyslexia. So although they may have a great understanding of it, they can't refer you for a test. Or it's not like ADHD, because ADHD is categorized both medical and as a specific learning difference. So in other words, the onus is on the individual. So that's why lots of universities will subsidize or pay for diagnostic assessments. Schools, it tends to be more difficult because it comes from the school budget, obviously. Universities are quite happy in most cases to subsidize students because they are expensive when it comes to an individual having to do it for themselves. But an employer like a university can do it under contract with a company like Posturite and get a good deal for their clients, because the benefits are, once you've got the diagnosis, that means you can then undertake an in-depth assessment of need, and then all the strategies that David was talking about can be implemented. And I think that would make a huge difference because if you've helped somebody's self-esteem, you've helped their confidence, that means productivity increases, etc. You've got a happier person working in an office job where previously they thought, this isn't for me.
That's great. Thanks, Patrick. I've got another question, and there's been a couple of a similar theme in terms of getting diagnosed quite a long time ago, which is obviously great. I'll mention two because the question can be in two parts. One of the questions, I say, I'll ask in two parts is the test, is this dyslexia assessment the same now as it was in 1996, or people that may have got a diagnosis many years ago? And the second part of that question, what difference does it make if you do know when you're potentially older and you've just managed this for years? What difference would a diagnosis make?
So if you have a old assessment, it depends who did the assessment. They changed the rules probably about 10-15 years ago. So you have to have had a specific qualification from an old assessment, which you probably will have. So so the best thing to do would be to take your old assessment and just ask somebody to have a look at it. Maybe if you're going to take a practice examination within your workplace, you could ask the practice organisation if it might be acceptable. 9 times out of 10 it should be fine, but there are a few people that were assessing a long time ago that didn't have the right qualification. An assessment conducted now or in the last 10-15 years should be valid for life. Sometimes when you're at school, you have a shorter assessment just to have extra time in examinations, and that probably wouldn't be sufficient to use as an official diagnosis. But yeah, so most times it will be fine, but get that checked. You shouldn't need a new assessment in most cases. The second part of the question was, Andy, that was about why would you want to be assessed now if you've been managing?
Yeah, if you've managed it for years, what would how would that benefit essentially?
So I would go back to what I said in the presentation just now, which is you might think you're managing fine, but you probably could put better strategies in place if you had some coaching and use some assistive technology. Things shouldn't be taking you as long as they are taking you, and they shouldn't be as difficult. If you find out you have dyslexia, and have a look at your profile and maybe have a chat to an assessor during the assessment and find out exactly how long things are taking you. Whereas perhaps you didn't realize that. You might think it's normal to read things 3, 4, or 5 times to have to process them. You'll get some validation. You'll be able to look back, as Dave said, on things that have happened in the past and think, haha, so that's why I found that so difficult. And just move forward with better strategies and a better understanding of yourself. So I think it's definitely worth having an assessment and finding out what your profile is and if you should get some support in place.
Excellent. Thanks, Kathy. We've had quite a few questions both today and previously, essentially around co-occurring conditions, and I'll speak about 3 that have been mentioned. One is the difference between dyslexia and ADHD. One has also mentioned dyslexia and autism, and another one, how frequently does dyslexia co-occur with developmental language disorder? It's something that we spoke about before today, Kathy, haven't we, when we've previously mentioned about co-occurring conditions. How common is it, and yeah, what potentially do people may need to do about that?
Very common. quite often you find that people do have more than one specific learning difficulty, but they haven't realised it. They might have just thought, for example, that they weren't very good at sport, you know, thought it was normal to bump into people when they're walking down the road next to them. Have used strategies to avoid things that involve motor coordination, maybe didn't get a pen license at school. They might have dyspraxia as well as dyslexia. We're not a huge fan of labels when we assess, but I think it's useful to really understand your profile. So if you feel it's there, we'll do some extra tests, extra kind of talking assessments, and give you 2 diagnoses, and you'd find out on the day of the assessment. Attention, ADHD, you can't, I mean, I myself, you know, can't open my social media or really read anything without reading something about ADHD. It's very much kind of in the headlines at the moment. And lots of the things that are common with ADHD also can occur in dyslexia or dyspraxia. If you come forward for an assessment, you'll find out if you have ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, and that means you'll be able to move forward with the right profile and the right strategies in place. Autism, also there's more publicity about that at the moment. That's something that you could be screened for to see if you might need to take that further. And as I said, the new definition that's coming out for dyslexia next year will name all those developmental disorders and actually say that they are commonly diagnosed alongside dyslexia. So yet again, the message is come forward for an assessment, find out what your profile is, and then you'll see what the next steps might be. Do you have anything you wanted to add, Patrick?
No, I think that's it. I mean, there was a time when you went for a dyslexia assessment and that was it. You were just assessed for dyslexia. And even though the person might put in the report, he or she may have some dyspraxic tendencies, they wouldn't do the diagnosis because, of course, well, I wasn't asked to do dyspraxia diagnosis. That's a totally different thing. And in some cases, you'd actually be charged extra.
Yeah.
And then if you said, well, I think I might have ADHD as well, that'll be an extra fee as well, etc. But so whereas now it's kind of all in one diagnostic. We don't charge extra per label, in other words. But there's a huge overlap. I mean, and all the attention on ADHD has been useful in the sense that it's brought people forward. But a lot of times I'm telling them they're actually dyslexic because people have forgotten about dyslexia and dyspraxia. And there's a huge overlap with the working memory because the working memory also causes problems with distractibility, particularly distractibility, reading comprehension, listening comprehension, time management. These are all things you would associate with ADHD, but you would also associate them with somebody with dyslexia. So there's a massive overlap. And that's why I think it's important. The new way of diagnosing, I think, is a vast improvement because we can tell you something at the end.
That's great. Thanks, guys. There is an additional condition as well. Someone's mentioned about speaking to a couple of people within their work about the individuals having trouble spelling words or forming sentences. So when speaking in concern, they're concerned that they may be suffering from early onset dementia. How can we tell the difference between this and dyslexia? Could there be an overlap of conditions within those 2 conditions at all?
Well, as assessors, our regulatory body says that if we suspect anything medical, such as dementia, or then we should refer to a GP, and we would include that. However, what I would say is that quite often I see people above 30, maybe, who really worry as they get older that their short-term memory issues and forgetting things are caused by dementia, you know, which is a terrible worry. And in fact, they do have dyslexia and the symptoms have always been there. But as the workloads and the demands on their memory have increased as they've got older, it's become more apparent to them. You know, it could be dyslexia, but any symptoms that come on suddenly should always be referred to a GP. Can I cover something else, Andy? I'm just noticing in the chat that people are talking about ADHD being diagnosed again. So there are two different kinds of diagnosis for an assessment for ADHD. One is a medical, and one is for a specific learning difficulty. ADHD is considered a specific learning difficulty because it causes problems with managing in the workplace and with study. So if you go to your GP and ask for an assessment for ADHD, they will refer you to see a medical person. And if you see a medical person who have a medical diagnosis of ADHD, you can access medication. And if you come to see somebody like us, a specialist teacher, then you, or an educational psychologist, then you will get a diagnosis of ADHD as a specific learning difficulty, which will entitle you to all the support you could possibly need, but you won't be able to have medication. You'd need to go to your GP for that. And, you know, one would hope that once you've had your diagnosis of ADHD as a specific learning difficulty, you could have some coaching, get some strategies in place, and then you hopefully would find that you didn't need medication because you've already been able to get the strategies to manage it in place.
One other small point is that there is something called acquired dyslexia. So we've been talking mainly about developmental dyslexia. So you're born with it, and you can see it happening from the earliest days in school. From the minute they try to learn the alphabet, there's going to be issues. But you can have it acquired as well, and that could be the result of a head injury, an accident, stroke, etc., etc. It would be rare because they tend to go the medical route. But I have assessed people with acquired dyslexia, and the net result is you recommend exactly the same strategies. I mean, there's no magic here. These things work. They work for all of us, but they work especially for people with dyslexia, and that's why these things are useful. Particularly as Dave was talking about artificial intelligence like ChatGPT, that's going to have an amazing effect for people with dyslexia, particularly with any task that involves lots of reading comprehension.
That's great. There's quite this maybe for yourself, Dave, that there's quite a few questions generally about the assessment process and where do I go and what do I do if I actually want somebody to go through a diagnostic assessment. That's probably part one. Part two is can you recommend assistive typing software or platforms? Some talks about Grammarly being used, but how do probably one is the assessment, the diagnostic process, and probably two is how do we identify what somebody needs? I know you briefly covered it in your presentation, but it may be worth just going through it briefly again, if that's okay.
Yeah, so if you approach your line manager and they will fund a diagnostic, they would then put you forward to a company like Posturite. We have what we use at the moment, a referral form. That will change in the very near future. We're going to go digital and you will apply that way. Our referral form generally comes into our team. Everything's all secure. And they will then get permission to show your information before we go ahead. And then they will book you in for the assessment. Assessment will proceed. And then a report will follow that. You don't get the report straight away, but you do get full your diagnostic straight away. I believe that's right, guys. For the second part for a workplace needs assessment, it's pretty much the same thing. We've got a referral form and you refer through for the condition. You don't have to know specifically the condition. We generalize it as neurodiverse because our assessors are aware of all the different traits and challenges you might have, and they will look at your challenges with your working role. If you have challenges with meetings, if you have challenges with time management, they'll look at all the different ones that you've got and make recommendations to support that, whether that's technology or whether that's actual, coping strategies, training, etc. Regarding the technology, I don't want to go too in depth on that. It will spoil our next webinar, guys. I will give you a bit of an idea. So I mentioned speech to text. So we can speak the actual words using a headset, and it will type in. There is a Windows version and there's one called Dragon, and that types in the words that you're speaking. I can actually speak better than I can write because one is I do believe I've got some dyspraxia. My coordination isn't the best. So even though my spelling is even bad, my coordination on the keyboard isn't good. And it's the same with my handwriting. So using the speech to text takes away that physical need. And sometimes the software has, corrections in there, and it'll always know the contents of the sentence that you're saying. I struggle with similar words, there, and there, here, and here. Which one should I be using? It knows because of the contents of the words I'm saying which it should be. So straight away, that's proofread for me. And then we've got the basically the opposite, where it's text to speech. And the most common ones on the market are products called like Read and Write and Claro Read, actually owned by a company called TextHelp. There are many different ones coming on the market now, especially with AI coming on board. But these products will basically speak any text that you're reading. So if you've got the reading challenge, you're challenged with understanding what you're reading. I get the distortion of text when I'm reading. So by colouring the background, that settles that down. I'm able to understand what I'm reading, but by having it read audibly as well, I can take the information in better. With regards products like Grammarly, some companies don't like Grammarly because it's American servers. So there are other products on the market. Read and Write can do the grammar checking, but there's also a product in Office 365 called Microsoft Editor that will do your grammar checking. I like to use that. I can use that at Posturite because we're not, we're not concerned about Microsoft. We're more concerned about the actual Grammarly being an independent product. So that helps me with my grammar checking. It helps me with my punctuation, spell checking, and whether I'm being too informal in my text. So that's taking away me doing those extra hours at night, checking all my work that I do. So yeah, we'll talk more about the technology in our next event in October, guys.
That's great. Thanks, Dave. Really, question we're asked quite a lot, actually. As a business, how do we encourage people to come forward when they feel they have dyslexia or any other condition? There are probably a lot of people unaware of the potential support. We've talked about those opportunities for people to have that conversation, and whether people call it disclosure, people call it opening up, everyone has their own term. Is there anything that, as an organisation, that people can do to encourage that at all, or open that up if anyone's got any opinions on that?
Yeah, I mean, I know in a number of organizations, they'll have like neurodiverse chat groups. I mean, all of these things are so much easier now. You can have a little chat room and people get involved that way. But I mean, really, it's encouraging. So it's seen as a positive rather than a negative, because if your objective is to have employees who produce work commensurate with their ability, what's not to like? I mean, that's exactly what you want. You want people working to their full. I mean, it's working to their full ability. I mean, that's what quality is, isn't it? It's ability being used to its utmost. And if you want quality for your staff, then all the things that Dave is talking about, rather than having them go home and do all this in the evening, camouflaging the effects of their problem, and then coming into work the next day shattered, wouldn't it be just so much easier if they could do it there and then in real time? Dragon, the one that Dave mentioned, I think that's particularly amazing. The fact that it knows the homophones, like their book is over there, they're going to the shops, that's staggering, because that's a recurring problem with people with dyslexia. Homophones is one of the things we check for. Most dyslexic people have an issue with homophones, and there's absolutely millions of them in the English language, so they crop up all over the place. So the fact that you never have to worry about them with Dragon, that in itself is just a liberation.
That's great, thanks. I'm conscious of time, so we'll finish with one that we've been asked a couple of times. And if we haven't got to your question, apologies again, we will reach out to you separately. This is a reoccurring question that we get about language generally, and a couple of people have asked about the term of I have dyslexia, or I am dyslexic, which is the best way to describe this. We had this on the webinar we did previously around autism, and there was a lot of different opinions in terms of what the personal preference is. I suppose there's no right or wrong answer here, is there? In terms of what the general preference needs to be.
Yeah. It changes. I mean, it used to be person first, so we were always taught person first, so a person with dyslexia. But I mean, I think young people are kind of reclaiming these things now, so they haven't got a problem with saying, I'm a dyslexic person. That was probably best to ask, because as you get older, these things change without you realizing. So always best to check first, in my experience.
And I suppose having conversations like this, as I mentioned earlier, we're having more conversation around this to be comfortable enough to ask, which again is a question we're asked quite a lot about people being concerned to actually offend people to actually open up and have this conversation. And that's probably goes back to the opening up question as well. And actually asking that question and not being afraid to have the conversation is really key generally, isn't it?
Yeah, it's to get rid of that taboo thing. I mean, a lot of this is to get away from the word disability, which is such an old-fashioned word, but important to remember purely because in the Equality Act, that's the word they use. The word they use is disability. And it's important for employers to understand that even though we use words like neurodiverse, dyslexia, SPLD, they are recognized by law as a disability. So I mean, apart from just good practice, you do have a legal requirement to make a reasonable adjustment for people.
Fantastic. Yeah, I will leave it on that note if that's okay. Conscious of the time, but yeah, it just leaves me to say thank you, Kathy, Patrick, and David. Thanks so much. And thank you to everyone that's jumped on the webinar. Really interesting. There's probably another couple of hours we could do there with the content and the questions that we have. If you do have any queries, please do reach out to us. Everything that we've discussed, we can support you as an individual, as an organisation. Enablement at posturite.co.uk, and we can be in touch. Do reach out to us. As we've mentioned, the next webinar, a few people have questioned the date. It will be Wednesday, 23rd of October. There will be an e-shot as normal. Post on LinkedIn, etc., to sign up for that. And there is a way via the website where you can sign up for webinar e-shots. But yes, it will leave me to say again, thank you to everyone. Thanks for everyone for joining in. And yeah, hopefully we will see you on the next webinar. Thank you.